Have you ever worked tirelessly toward a goal? Maybe you've been, grinding away at it for a decade, head down, making all those sacrifices.
Right.
And then you finally reach the summit, you look around, and you just wonder, wait, what do I do now?
Yeah, the classic arrival fallacy.
Exactly, because you spend so much of your energy just focusing on the climb itself that you completely forget to plan for what actually happens when you arrive.
Right.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into an incredibly insightful financial guide. It's titled Maximizing the Milestone: Strategies for a $300K Retirement Account.
It's a fantastic source.
It really is. And our mission for you today as we go through this is to understand exactly why hitting that $300,000 mark in a 401k isn't just a moment to sit back and celebrate.
I mean, you should celebrate a little.
Well, yeah, definitely celebrate a little. But it is a critical inflection point. It's this exact moment that requires a complete shift in how you manage your money. You have to move from just indiscriminately putting cash away to actively steering the ship.
That transition from being an accumulator of wealth to an allocator of wealth it's really what we're going to synthesize for you today.
Yeah.
The materials we're looking at outline some highly practical steps, but our goal is to get into the mechanics of those strategies. Because the rules of the game fundamentally change once your account reaches this specific size.
They really do.
The decisions you make right at this crossroad, how you view risk, how you structure your assets, and how you anticipate taxes, they can have a massive, outsized impact on your long-term financial trajectory. You've already built the engine. Now it's about fine-tuning it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the first major theme the guide tackles is the sheer psychology and honestly the rather invisible power of compounding at this level.
Yes, the compounding effect is huge here.
The authors point out a detail that really frames the whole discussion. Getting to this $300,000 milestone is a grueling process. It usually takes 10 years or more of strict financial discipline.
A full decade.
A full decade. And obviously that timeline fluctuates depending on your individual contribution rate and how the broader market has performed during that stretch. But getting to this point means you have built a serious ingrained habit. You've automated your savings. You've stayed invested through the dips.
You've been doing all the hard work.
Right.
And that 10-year timeline is vital to acknowledge because the psychology of those first 10 years is often the hardest part of investing.
Oh, absolutely.
In the early days of funding a 401k, saving often feels like throwing money into a void. You check your balance after a year of sacrifices, and the growth just feels incredibly slow. You're doing all the heavy lifting.
Yeah, painful.
But right around that $300,000 mark, the math shifts. You start to experience the true velocity of compounding. This is the moment where the numbers stop feeling like a chore and start functioning as a massive tailwind.
And the text highlights a specific mind-bending fact that completely changes how you look at your paycheck. The authors note that at this $300,000 level, in a strong market year, you might actually make more money from your portfolio's returns than the actual dollar amount you contributed to your 401k from your salary.
Which is an amazing milestone to hit.
It's wild to think about. If you just do the math, a standard 8 or 9% return on $300,000 is roughly $24,000 to $27,000.
Right.
For many people, that return is physically higher than the IRS limit for what they're even allowed to contribute in a given year.
Exactly.
The market is finally working harder than you are. You're putting your thousands of dollars in, but the account itself is generating even more thousands of dollars just by existing.
What's fascinating here is how taking your foot off the gas at this exact moment can severely stunt your trajectory.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, the math shows that compound interest is just hitting its stride at this level. But the psychological temptation for investors is to see the market generating more wealth than their own contributions and think, well, the account is self-sustaining now.
Ah, okay.
They think, I can afford to scale back my contributions and spend that money elsewhere.
Right, because the pressure feels off.
Exactly. But the strategy outlined in these materials forcefully argues against that impulse. The math works because you keep feeding the engine. If you abandon the contribution strategy that got you to the milestone the second you cross it, you are robbing your future self of the most explosive years of compound growth.
Wow.
Reaching this milestone means your habits are working, not that they are obsolete.
Which makes perfect sense when you frame it like that. You wouldn't train for a marathon and then stop running at mile 20 just because the downhill slope feels easier.
Right, you have to finish the race.
But while you maintain your saving habits, the guide makes a really strong case that your focus needs a total overhaul. As investors, it is incredibly natural to fixate on specific dollar amounts. We just love round
You
numbers,
do.
100,000, 300,000, half a million. We treat our portfolio balance like a scoreboard.
It's a tangible metric, so it's totally understandable why we use it to measure success. But the authors warn that managing a portfolio based on its dollar amount is a dangerous trap.
A trap.
Yes. When you hit this juncture, the strategy must pivot away from looking at the size of the account and shift heavily toward analyzing your time horizon. The dollar amount represents your past effort. The time horizon dictates your future risk.
And the text introduces a very specific, actionable framework here called the 5-year rule. The guide states that if you are within 5 years of your target retirement date, it is time to shift your portfolio to a more conservative stance than the one you hold today. It's a definitive line in the sand.
The mechanics behind that 5-year rule are rooted in something called sequence of returns risk.
Which is a big deal in financial planning.
A huge deal. Think about it. If you are 15 years away from retiring and the stock market drops by 20%, you have ample time for your portfolio to recover.
Right, you just wait it out.
Exactly. But if you are 2 years away from retiring and taking withdrawals and the market crashes, selling your assets at that depressed price can permanently damage your nest egg. Shifting to a more conservative stance, which typically means reducing equities and increasing fixed income assets like bonds or cash equivalents, insulates you from that specific vulnerability.
But the authors are very careful to note that shifting to a conservative stance doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. They emphasize the absolute need for a personalized risk assessment to determine your proper asset allocation. And they use an excellent hypothetical to drive this home.
It's a great example.
They point out that what works perfectly for one person at age 40 might be an absolute disaster for another 40-something.
Let's actually walk through that hypothetical to see why generic advice falls apart at this wealth level.
Let's do it.
Imagine 2 investors, both 40 years old, both with $300,000 in their 401k. Investor A is aggressively pursuing early retirement and plans to leave the workforce at 45.
Okay.
Investor B loves their career and plans to work until they are 65. Based on the 5-year rule, Investor A needs to immediately begin shifting into capital preservation mode. They need to move assets into bonds to protect against a market downturn right as they start withdrawing.
Right, because they're within that 5-year window.
Exactly. Investor B, however, still has 25 years of compounding ahead of them. If Investor B adopted Investor A's conservative portfolio, inflation would severely erode their purchasing power over the next 2 decades. They need the growth engine of equities.
That perfectly illustrates why there is no one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah.
2 identical balances, 2 identical ages, but 2 completely opposite strategies.
Totally different needs.
The text strongly advocates for coordinating with a financial advisor at this stage. You need a professional who can run these complex projections based on your unique goals, rather than just plugging your age into a generic target date retirement calculator online. The architecture has to be custom built for when you specifically plan to need the money.
Absolutely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because as your balance grows and you start looking under the hood of your portfolio, the guide points out that there are hidden dangers quietly lurking inside your asset allocation. Things you probably aren't even aware of.
They creep up on you.
They really do. And the first major hidden risk it identifies is the overaccumulation of company stock.
This is an incredibly common vulnerability, especially for professionals who receive compensation packages that include restricted stock units or employee stock purchase plans.
Yeah, the source notes that as a 401k or overall portfolio grows, holding too much stock in your own employer becomes a serious systemic risk. And the insidious part is that it happens so gradually.
That's the dangerous part.
You get a company match in stock. You participate in the ESPP because of the discount. The stock appreciates over a decade. And suddenly, without you making any active decision to do so, 40% of your $300,000 nest egg is tied to the exact same company that writes your biweekly paycheck.
It creates a massive double exposure.
Right.
If the sector your company operates in faces a sudden downturn, your company's stock plummets right at the exact same time they might be announcing layoffs. You risk losing your primary income and a huge portion of your life savings simultaneously.
Ouch. That's a scary scenario.
It violates the core principle of asset protection. But the broader issue the authors are highlighting here is the illusion of diversification.
I love the analogy the source uses to explain this illusion. It says that without active, professional coordination, investing over a decade is, quote, kind of like being at a buffet and selecting a little bit of everything without a direction.
The buffet analogy is so accurate.
You're just walking down the line, putting things on your plate because they look appealing in the moment, but none of the flavors actually go together. I think a lot of people can relate to this.
I see it all the time.
I remember looking at my own portfolio a few years ago and realizing I owned a broad S&P 500 index fund, a separate technology-focused ETF, and individual shares of Apple. I thought I was diversified because I held 3 different things.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the danger of that buffet approach is what professionals call unintended concentration risk. Your example is perfect.
Thanks.
You thought you were diversifying by holding 3 distinct investments, but because Apple is the heaviest weighting in the S&P 500 and the dominant weighting in a tech ETF, you are actually just buying the exact same risk profile in 3 different wrappers.
Exactly.
When you arbitrarily select mutual funds over the course of 10 years without a unified strategy, you inevitably end up with massive overlapping positions. You aren't diversifying your risk, you are just duplicating it.
You thought you were getting a balanced meal, but you actually just got 5 different versions of mashed potatoes.
That is exactly it. And this is precisely why the focus must shift from simply accumulating assets to actively coordinating them. Untangling a decade's worth of overlapping investments requires a forensic look at what is actually inside those mutual funds.
Yeah, you really have to lift the hood.
You do. You have to ensure that large cap, small cap, international, and fixed income assets are working together to balance volatility rather than unknowingly amplifying your exposure to one specific sector.
Untangling that buffet of investments naturally leads into the most complex part of managing wealth at this level. Because when you start moving money around, changing allocations, and planning for withdrawals, you immediately run into the IRS.
This raises an important question, particularly regarding account types and tax strategy. How you position your assets today dictates the tax burden you will face tomorrow.
The guide dives deep into the topic of taxes, specifically tackling the temptation of Roth conversions. The text notes that investors who hit the $300,000 mark often start asking if they should convert their pre-tax 401k dollars into Roth accounts.
It's a very common question at this stage.
And on paper, the appeal is incredibly strong. The source reminds us that Roth accounts offer tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawals in retirement. The idea of paying the taxes now and never having to worry about what the government does to tax rates in the future sounds like a bulletproof strategy.
It sounds ideal, but let's look at the actual math of a conversion. A Roth conversion means taking pre-tax money you haven't paid income tax on yet, and moving it to a post-tax Roth account.
Okay.
When you do that, the amount you convert is added to your taxable income for that very year.
That could be a big hit.
It can be. The authors issue a major caution here. Timing is absolutely everything. It is not a universal yes. According to the text, if you anticipate being in a lower tax bracket later in retirement than you are right now, you should generally wait to convert or avoid converting entirely.
Wait, let me make sure I'm understanding the implication of that. If I'm 45 in my peak earning years and sitting in the 24% or 32% tax bracket, taking a voluntary tax hit today to convert those funds sounds brutal. Is the guide really saying I shouldn't just swallow that pill for the sake of tax-free growth later?
That is exactly what the authors are saying. If you pay a 32% tax rate today on a conversion, but in retirement your income drops and you would only be in the 12% or 22% tax bracket, when you withdraw that pre-tax money, you have effectively lost money to the government unnecessarily.
Oh.
You paid a premium for a tax benefit you didn't mathematically need. The strategy requires projecting your future tax liability. And the source points out that this exact same timing logic applies to making Roth contributions directly within a 401k, which is becoming a standard option in most corporate plans.
Right.
You constantly have to weigh your current peak earning tax burden against your projected retirement tax burden.
That requires an incredible amount of foresight. You are essentially placing a bet on what the tax code will look like 20 years from now.
You are.
But the guide offers a really elegant, often overlooked solution to this puzzle. A final piece of the strategic architecture. The source highlights the power of the taxable brokerage account.
It is arguably the most versatile tool an investor can leverage, yet it is chronically underutilized.
The text notes that many savers once they hit these major milestones, are completely blind to anything outside their workplace retirement plans. They max out the 401k, maybe they fund an IRA, and they stop there.
That's usually where the planning ends.
But the guide argues that building a taxable brokerage account alongside your 401k provides an entirely different dimension of control. But wait, I already have a tax-deferred 401k and maybe a tax-free Roth. Why would I want to utilize an account where I have to pay taxes on capital gains and dividends every single year?
Because of the specific type of tax you pay and the lack of restrictions on the money.
Right.
Taxable brokerage accounts are funded with after-tax money, meaning you can withdraw the principal at any time without penalty. There is no age 59 and a half rule.
That's a huge benefit.
It is. More importantly, when you sell an investment in a taxable account that you've held for longer than a year, the profits are taxed at long-term capital gains rates. Historically, long-term capital gains rates, which are 0%, 15%, or 20%, depending on your income, are significantly lower than ordinary income tax rates, which apply to 401k withdrawals.
Right, because 401k withdrawals are taxed as regular income.
Exactly. Furthermore, taxable accounts don't have required minimum distributions, or RMDs, forcing you to withdraw money in your 70s.
Which means you control exactly when and how you realize that income.
Precisely. And that word control is the ultimate objective of this entire guide. The authors summarize this beautifully. The goal of a modern wealth strategy is to build a diversified tax architecture.
Yes, tax architecture.
Yes. You want a mix of pre-tax accounts, tax-free Roth accounts, and taxable brokerage accounts. When you hold assets across all three of those buckets, you dramatically increase your flexibility in retirement.
Because you can pull from different accounts in different years to perfectly engineer your tax bracket.
Exactly.
If you need a large lump sum one year to buy an RV, but pulling it all from your pre-tax 401k would bump you into a massive tax bracket or trigger higher Medicare premiums, you can pull a smaller portion from the 401k, supplement it with tax-free Roth funds, and top it off by selling long-term holdings in the taxable account.
You've got it.
You effectively manage your adjusted gross income down to the dollar. It is like giving your future self a menu of strategic options rather than a tax ultimatum.
You are building a financial ecosystem. The $300,000 mark is just the fuel. How you structure these accounts is the engine that determines how far that fuel will actually take you.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and distill everything from this strategic guide, the bottom line is crystal clear. Hitting $300,000 in a 401k is a massive, incredibly difficult feat.
It truly is.
It is proof that your discipline works. But it is not a finish line. It marks a vital, permanent transition. From this moment forward, your strategic allocation and your tax planning matter exactly as much as your savings rate.
Absolutely.
You can't just rely on blindly putting dollars into a single bucket anymore. The mechanics of wealth demand that you untangle your concentration risk, optimize for your specific time horizon, and build tax flexibility. Maintaining the discipline you've shown so far while stepping up to actively manage the architecture of your money is what will turn this strong balance into a resilient, bulletproof retirement.
I completely agree, and I want to validate the effort of anyone listening right now. If you are taking the time to absorb the mechanics of these strategies, you are already executing the pivot.
Yeah, you're doing the work.
Gathering this level of information, questioning the efficiency of your current setup, and seeking out an understanding of the why behind the numbers, that is the exact kind of active wealth management that protects your hard-earned money. You are already making that vital transition from simply saving to truly strategizing.
It is a phenomenal shift in perspective.
It really is. And before we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that isn't explicitly detailed in the financial guide, but that builds directly on what we've unpacked today regarding the math of compounding and your time horizons.
Okay, let's hear it.
We discussed how, at this specific milestone, the math flips. Your money is now at a point where it might be working harder and earning more in a given year than your own physical contributions. Your portfolio is effectively generating a second salary.
Right.
So how does that realization change the way you view your day job? When your portfolio becomes your highest earning coworker, does it change the amount of stress you are willing to tolerate? Does it change what you want to do with the next 10 years of your career?
That is an incredibly powerful question to chew on. When your money finally works harder than you do, the options you have in life fundamentally expand. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope this exploration helped clarify the mechanics of your next steps and gave you a robust new framework to consider as you grow your wealth. Keep asking those hard questions, keep analyzing your financial architecture, and most importantly, stay curious. We'll catch you next time.